When you are a disruptive company, I think there are certain things that you need to do in order to succeed. And one of them is explaining yourself very, very well, and to the key people. And actually, part of that is to the media. But when you are disrupting a regulatory framework, for example, be that government regulation or self-regulation of an industry, being able to explain yourself in a clear, coherent, and structured way is very important.
So what did Bitcoin do wrong there, for example?
Yeah, so when I kind of talk to a client first, I kind of go through three very easy steps just to kind of work out where we stand. And first question is looking at their technology. What does their technology do? It's the kind of broad outer circle, because technology can do lots of things, but not all of it is legal. And so then we look at what is legal, and then we look at what does the company want to do. And if those three circles are concentric, you probably don't need my help, but you probably want to be bursting through one of those boundaries at some point, challenging the regulation and needing some guidance. And even if you're not going to do something, you either want to be in control of how that regulation affects you, or it's going to affect you in ways that you don't want to. So with Facebook, for example, we challenged a lot of privacy norms and conventions because the regulations were designed for a world pre-internet even, let alone pre-social networking. And so then you get together a team, you work out what the strategy is, and you have to try and convince the regulators that your approach is correct. Mm-hmm. But that takes leadership. It takes a centralized kind of point that you need to have someone to rally around and decide what that strategy is going to be. And my fear for Bitcoin is that because it is so distributed, and I know there is the foundation, I know that there are the different national organizations, but because it is so distributed, if I want to speak to Bitcoin, who do I phone? Right. And I know that's a kind of an old story about Europe, but you need to have a strong face that has a strong reputation, that is well trusted, and that you can build those relationships with the regulators that count. And it's the regulators that you need to be seeing. You need to live on a plane and travel around the world, going to speak to them and building those networks and building those trusts. And regulation can be, it's not only necessary, but it's usually helpful, in fact. Another lesson that I learned previously was, working, a lot of Americans can be quite forthright about, no, we are right, especially when you're working for very bright companies. We're right, everyone else is wrong, kind of stuff it, we're going to do it our way anyway, which is great. But actually regulation can be hugely helpful when people are skittish about your products, when every day there's a bad privacy story or safety story about you. At Facebook, we had been discussing with the Irish Data Protection Commissioner in Europe, which is where the international headquarters of Facebook is, was actually, let's have an audit. We actually think we're doing a pretty good job on privacy. The story is extremely negative. Go through an audit, publish the audit publicly, and then take that on a roadshow to all the different regulators around Europe. Ireland is our headquarters, but look, we've done a good job. You can trust us. We're human beings. We have, legs and mouths, and we're not some faceless company. So regulation can be a massive benefit when you're in control of it. And if you're not in control of it, others will use it against you.
So I'm Julia Streets, and I own and run a business development, marketing, communications consultancy, and this is my world, kind of around Canary Wharf in the city, and I basically work with financial services and technology firms, helping them with their business development strategies, thinking about a lot of that stuff that Luke's talked about around what's your message, where do you compete, where do you differentiate, how do you get your message out, both in terms of the UK, across Europe. We've also got a team in New York, and we have clients all around the world. So that's kind of the the day job that I spend my time doing. And I set up my company 5.5 years ago because one of my ex-employers saw a gap in the market driven by regulation. So there was the MiFID regulation, Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, in 2007, that basically changed the way in which equities could be traded on the stock exchanges by doing two very simple things. One of them was it removed the concentration rules, meaning that if you wanted to trade a domestic stock, you had to do it on your domestic stock exchange. And the other was that they introduced a thing called best execution, which is a terrible expression when you're trying to explain it to my mother when she wonders what you do all day. But it is basically the rules that say you can now look at multiple different venues, and it is you, the sell-side broker, and it is incumbent upon you to get the best available price given a number of considerations that exist in the markets today. And what that meant was, for the first time ever, there could be a new entrant coming into the market that could offer a pan-European trading platform. And so my first client was a company called Chi-X, and it was started by a firm called Instinet, now part of Nomura. And then they opened up to consortium, and there was a real appetite in the market for the general frustration with stock exchanges because they were behaving in a very monopolistic way. They could charge monopolistic rents. They were charging an extraordinary amount for market data. Their technology was deemed to be slow, and there were many frustrations in the market with that. So a number of the sell-side firms and investment banks came together, supported the initiative, and launched this business. Now, where one leads, many others come. So that you might have heard of Turquoise, for example, or another firm called Bats Trading, very big in the States. They set up over here. But what that did was it basically drove down the cost of trading in Europe. So when Chi-X first launched, for example, it was 10 times cheaper and 10 times faster to trade in Europe than it had ever been possible before. This has had a marked impact on the ability particularly for the buy side. So if you think about the investment funds, and if you think about the pension funds and insurance funds and their ability to trade faster and more effectively, where, as I said, where one led, others followed, and where you get fragmentation, you get consolidation, and Chi-X was sold 5 years later to its largest competitor, Bats, for I think it was just over $305 million US dollars. And basically my business has grown on a kind of supporting the vendor community of other innovators who bring out disruptive technology to support this massive change. And so the first question about how regulation has responded to what it kind of created, if you like. So we're now going through MiFID 2, which is the review of the successes of MiFID 1, and MiFID 2, which is just about to go to trilogue debate in Brussels, now looks at the efficiencies that have been brought to bear in the equities markets and how that's being rolled out in other equities markets. So there's a lot of over-the-counter OTC trading that now can happen electronically, and they're looking to drive those efficiencies through. I think in terms of the regulation in financial services, I think we've got quite a long way to go in terms of we haven't seen the extent of regulation driving innovation in equities or other asset classes, because this is just the beginning. I think that's going to go on for another kind of 10, 15 years. I mean, the problem with most European regulations, it tends to get delayed and it tends to take its time to come through. But what I would say, the big thing I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years is that the opportunism and the innovation of entrepreneurs who have done their time in investment banks or institutions, larger institutions, are really seeing the opportunities there. And if you think around kind of single European payments, if you think about other asset classes, so for example we represent Trayport, which is the energy trading platform, and looking at driving innovation and change through technology that's really disrupting the way the market's working. I think there's a lot more to come.
Facebook has put its made it fundamental to the service that you must use your identity, your own identity. Yes, people lie about their identity. Yes, some people have do some bad things. But the whole premise is that if you know who you're talking to, there is trust and there is accountability, and there are some rules in place to deal with the people who break those rules. Some systems in place. Sorry. And you have some anonymous social networks or pseudonymous ones that have frankly just haven't been anywhere near as successful. So I think online identity is part, and using your authentic identity, even if it's a little, you may change your surname slightly or use a pet's name, but if people know who that you're talking to, and actually some people were talking earlier about social verification. So actually, if I'm locked out of my bank account, do I have to actually, go and find the right key, all that kind of stuff, or could I kind of recommend people within a trusted network that or can all give little bits of a different key? So by using trust and knowing who you're talking to, you actually derive a lot greater benefit from the services that are available to you. And I think that trust and identity is necessary for a mass market product. And that's where, again, another concern of Bitcoin is for me anyway, that in a, when you need to have trust online, and that's the biggest concern people have about going online, is trust and authenticity. And who am I talking to? Is this a real business? Is this a real person? Is this a robot? That it'll struggle to become a more mainstream thing, especially when there is no centralized point of which you can have some kind of recourse. Yes, people will over time get considerably better at managing their own data, but you're essentially relying on a contract between two people, a social contract or a business contract that is enforceable by someone, by a court or by a service, and having very little knowledge of what lays behind a transaction, particularly financial money, I think will take a long time to get trust from a mass public. Sorry, I feel like I'm being very down on Bitcoin. I don't mean to be. I don't mean to be. Other services are available, but who have different structures as well. And with my policy hat on, the ones that will succeed in this market will be the ones who explain themselves the best to regulators. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to regulate themselves, because if they are right, and if people use those services, they'll win in the end. Regulation will change around them because they'll be the ones driving that change. But without that leadership in the regulatory front, I think actually as a whole, digital currencies are suffering. From a policy regulatory position, I know that individual companies have all been in to see respective governments, but some more centralized coordination would benefit. Some kind of, again, it's that, well, who do we call? Everyone's doing different things in different directions. Some are crypto, some are not. Some, it's very hard to understand how these things work. So, yeah, from a policy perspective, those who explain themselves the best, which I realize I'm doing a terrible job of right now, those who explain themselves the best to the regulators that count, in a coordinated manner, repeatedly. It's a long-term thing. It's about relationship building. Will be the ones that succeed.
And just to add a point to that, which is also what the regulators, particularly what I've seen in financial services in the world of investment, trading and exchanges and banking, etc., is the more the regulators can understand why this is a benefit to the customer, the end investor, that is only going to strengthen your cause. And what I say because we, in addition to working with fintechs here in kind of the world of the city, we also work with a lot of early stage growth companies. And what I always say to fintech startups that I mentor or that I've been working with is, think about your policy, think about your message, everything that Luke's just talked about, but also think about the buying behaviour of your customer. So any investment firm, any financial services firm that is looking to, or if they're looking at their requirements for the year, the resources they have to bring to bear, most of those will be driven by regulation. And it's the biggest headache for any financial services organisation today in a climate where we're just, apparently, if we're to be believed, we're turning a corner. Let's be positive. We're turning a corner after the biggest economic crisis ever, where they've had to lay people off. So if you can explain your product or service, your technology, in a way that is going to talk explicitly to a regulatory challenge that institution, that customer is facing, you've got a better chance of selling. The other thing we say is the biggest concern by any CTO, so know who you're selling to and know who the influencers around that are. And part of that's actually the regulator's opinion, the industry body's opinion, but also if you're talking to a CTO of any organisation who's going to have the ultimate sign-off on your product or service or whatever you're selling, is are you going to be around within the next year or two? So pedigree, experience, leadership, consistency of message, understand the channels to communicate through, and that is drawn out through all of your communications channels, whether that's through social media, through speaking at conferences, your collaterals, your sales force, your community, and the extended community in which you exist. The more you can be driving a positive, confident message that talks to a regulatory challenge and explains also to the regulators why this matters for the community, the stronger and the more compelling an argument you're going to have.
Yeah, just regulators hate surprise.
Yes. Yes.
So if they get a phone call from a financial journalist or a tabloid journalist or at worst, a government minister's office saying, what's this thing I've just seen? This is in your field. And they'll go, oh yes, we're investigating that.
Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what just happened in the U.S. Right. Like Homeland Security, Senator Harper's office.